Harper, and I usually record my events for people who cannot attend, and I don't have a tripod. I'm wondering if anyone would actually want to hold it. Okay, thank you. It's already recording.
All right,
with
perfect.
Me. Okay, thank you very much. I'm having a little technological problem, so I'm going to kind of wing it in terms of technology. I tried to use PowerPoint, and there it is, but I don't really know what else to do with it. I'm going to kind of introduce my work, and then I may be bouncing back and forth to my computer. So my name is Breeze Harper, and I'm the founder of the Sistah Vegan project, and I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of California, Davis. And I have been working on my dissertation work for the last few years, which looks at veganism, not just as a food justice issue, but also as an issue for animal liberation, and which I think is the most interesting for me, ways in which non-white racialized communities have used veganism as their way to combat the legacies of racialized colonialism on the body, like racism, health disparities, environmental racism. And today I was going to talk to people about the Afrocentric approach to veganism and how it differs from the mainstream approach, which is Eurocentric veganism. So I'm going to get my computer right now, and the title is called Would You Harbor Me? For those of you who can't see the subtitle, Food Justice, Decolonial, Vegan Politics, and Solidarity.
Do you want someone to do the slides for you?
Do you want another computer for your notes?
It doesn't work because I tried to email the document to my Kindle, and then I would be reading it, but I don't have Wi-Fi access. It didn't work, so I'm just going to take the computer down. I'm going to take that down and just kind of walk around with the computer.
Do you want Bluetooth is my computer?
You know, it's okay. This just shows how much of the technology I rely.
Will you grab this for a second? I'm gonna turn that screen off.
Can you hear me? Is this microphone on?
I think.
Yeah, I think it would be really
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello.
Here. Yeah. We hold it again.
Now I'm ready.
Right.
Can you talk loud?
Yeah, okay, can you hear me? Okay, great. So let's just start over. Let's just the last 5 minutes didn't happen. My excuse is that I'm 8.5 months sleep deprived because I have a baby, and we co-sleep, and they don't understand that you're supposed to sleep when it's dark. And I have to get at 5 o'clock for a flight, so I'm just kind of getting my bearings straight. So here I go. Would you harbor me? Would I harbor you? Would you harbor a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a heretic, convict, or spy? Would you harbor a runaway woman or child, a poet, a prophet, a king? Would you harbor an exile or a refugee, a person living with AIDS? Would you harbor a Taliban?
a scholar at the University of California, Davis, I have been researching how race, gender, and class affect Black female vegans and their conceptualization of ethics, healing the body, and nutrition. A few months ago, I attended the UC Davis Social Justice Teach-In featuring Dr. Angelia Davis. She spoke to us about how structural violence is a big problem in America, and that the pepper spraying event back in November 2011 was merely a symptom of this structural violence that we face every day, regardless of how you identify. After she gave her talk, I went up to the microphone and I asked her a question about ways in which social justice can be achieved in our country. She had noted in her keynote talk that the ways that we should look at social justice should of course encompass human beings, but also oftentimes we are not really considering the place of non-human animals and how we construct our sense of social justice. For her, the question of the animal seems to be missing from this entire thing called the Occupy movement, where we understand that 99% of those that are suffering seem to be human beings. But also within this hierarchy, there are those at the top who are of course humans, and those that suffer incredible amounts of pain are those at the bottom being non-human animals. And she elaborated more on this and really explaining to us, we never really think where our food comes from. And she focused specifically on the commodity of the chicken. And she said that not really reflecting on how much cruelty goes into how this chicken came to our plate speaks very, very highly of how our minds have been colonized by consumer capitalism. And I thought that was a very powerful statement. I believe she does practice veganism, but she doesn't really talk about that too much. And I thought it was something that I wanted to think more about in approaching food justice, attacking environmental racism, and understanding this concept of solidarity. So when I sing to you, would you harbor me? I'm not just talking about it physically, but when we go about doing our social justice activism, are we only thinking about our very, very own communities, or are we thinking about activism in a way that is in solidarity with other communities? We may not necessarily agree, but are we actually keeping in mind other human beings? And then beyond that, non-human beings, the planet's resources, just the whole planet as a whole. And her focus on understanding this commodity culture and questioning what types of social relations undergird commodities, whether it be chickens that are eaten for human consumption, or my focus being looking a few hundred years ago, looking at African Americans that were commodified for slavery, how that kind of undergirds a particular type of social relations. And for me, when I listen to Angelia Davis speak and I go back to my own work, which is looking at Black female vegans and really understanding how veganism is a method of food justice for particular communities, I started thinking about chicken that she's talking about as this commodity and what it means and how the chicken is a scale within the context of capitalism and colonialism, a scale of really understanding why there are particular environments and spaces that are healthy and that one can feel healthy and safe in, and other spaces where one can feel unhealthy and unsafe in. So I'm thinking about the commodity in chicken, then I'm also looking at my own work, Black feminism and vegan politics, and really understanding where does the aspect of food justice, animal compassion, and Black feminism kind of converge. And I thought of the work of Dr. Marion Sims. He's the father of rhetoric, and about 200 years ago, he was experimenting on African American female human slaves. And at that time, people of African descent who were chattel slaves, they were commodities. And in particular, Black female bodies represented it. It's a scale. So her womb is kind of this projection of how this body will create other human slaves to produce the spaces in America,
to produce this capitalist economy and to produce a more developed society. And I thought how this man experimented on about 30 African American female slaves on their vaginas and their wombs. He cut them up without anesthesia multiple times, and this one woman had to endure this over 30 times, and she was this commodity. And I fast forward now, and if you've ever on the receiving end of a speculum, it sucks, but the speculum is this commodity, this particular item that came out of the suffering of African American slavery. So thinking of all these things and thinking of how veganism is a way to kind of understand how solidarity works in my own work with Black female vegans and kind of looking at our own health disparities, our own health problems that have been caused by ways in which the Black female womb has been commodified several hundred years ago, and how that commodification is a result of basically a white supremacist, Eurocentric, capitalist creation of a nation. And how we see those legacies now where African American women and most people of African descent have these health disparities. They live in places where they do not have access to the foods that they need to become healthier. And then the same aspect, we still are in a culture where non-human animals are, for most human beings, they're used in experimentation. They're chopped up and cut up in a way that African American slaves, women were cut up. And that is not something that people would normally say that's acceptable now for human beings. It's acceptable for animals today, that most people benefit from being vivisected. So I started thinking about the ways in which African American women kind of understand that history, but at the same time are also dealing with the threat on their own human rights of never having been able to have a system of healing and food that people of African descent had before they were colonized or taken away from certain parts of Africa to build America. So I just wanted to give you that background before I actually go into the chapter that I want to read. And that's been influenced by these things that I'm talking about. And I want to focus on, well, why veganism, and in particular, why Afrocentric veganism, and what does that mean? So Afrocentric veganism is something that the mainstream vegan community is not particularly well read in. Most of the vegan mainstream rhetoric, philosophy, strategies come from a Eurocentric understanding of philosophy, ethics, and food. So I wanted to talk about kind of this convergence of understanding these legacies of not just capitalism on our bodies, but the commodification of the Black female body and what it has done to Black women today, and how a particular African American vegan woman uses vegan activism to decolonize the body and create a particular type of vegan philosophy that is actually more human rights centered and not really focused on animal liberation. So my questions as a Black feminist scholar interested in veganism is, how is veganism as food justice affected by the lived experience of being a Black racialized, sexualized subject in the USA? Has the racialized, colonial, and historical placement of her body, particularly the womb and her reproductive capacities, affected her vegan methodology? Suffice to say, these questions have yet to be explored within any significance in academic scholarship dedicated to food studies, ecofeminism, critical animal studies, and Black feminist theory in the Western Academy. These questions will be explored through the work of Black American holistic health activist and raw food vegan, Queen Afua. Through the sight of the Black female womb and the space of the kitchen, Afua uses the method of whole foods veganism to heal the Black body from what she perceives as the legacies of racialized colonialism. First, I'm going to analyze Queen Afua's Afrocentric consciousness through the framework known as revolutionary Black feminism. Now,
call it RBF because it's so long. RBF is an effective framework to explain the lived experiences of Black women. Their perspective understands that the structures, policies, and institutions that dominate the society cannot eradicate oppression that Black women endure until it is completely transformed, usually through revolutionary methods. In a carnocentric USA, Queen Afua's proposal of a vegan diet is revolutionary. African holistic health is a methodology that approaches the emotional and physical health of people of African descent from an Afrocentric point of view. While authors of the dominant canon of vegan philosophies in the global West have generally drawn from a Eurocentric philosophical genealogy, those who produce and practice African holistic health philosophies come from an Afrocentric genealogy of health and ethics. Afrocentrism argues that civilization and its advancements were not from Europe, but in fact from African cultures that influenced Europe and European advances in medicine, science, and technologies. In particular, Greece, which is always referred to as the beginning of civilization by Eurocentrists. Afrocentrists believe that the contemporary problems that Black people face within white-dominated nations cannot be resolved through a Eurocentric framework, only through an Afrocentric one, because the former upholds the power structures of whiteness at the expense of Black people. African holistic health literature has several thematic commonalities. A, they are authored by Black people. B, they promote a plant-centered diet, veganism, vegetarianism, raw foods. And C, believe that the holistic plant-centered nutrition should be the route chosen to decolonize the Black body from the effects of hundreds of years of anti-Black racism, white supremacy, and European colonialism. In this canon, such effects are described as racialized health disparities, environmental racism, corporate capitalism that targets the urban poor with junk food, the white colonizer's diet, which is the standard American diet, and neocolonialism, which she understands in most of the people in this canon as the prison industrial complex as the symptom of this neocolonialism. Most importantly, the leaders in the African holistic health movement advocate a healing of the Black psyche from the emotional and mental chaos and pain that they believe racialized colonialism and white supremacy have caused to the collective Black community in the USA. And one of these values is this push for the carnocentric industrialized diet that Afua and most of the African holistic community believe is not the true diet of African people, but a plant-centered one is. So I'm looking at a lot of Queen Afua's work, but the one book that I really am going to look at for this talk is the book called Sacred Woman. And Sacred Woman is a comprehensive guide to teach African women how to become a queen of one's womb health through a vegan diet, as well as comedic, spiritual, and exercise practices that will ultimately lead this Black woman to become a queen of one's health. In the preface of Sacred Woman, Queen Afu explains to her readers that the state of the womb reflects the state of your life, and goes on to argue that her guidebook will help women protect our wombs from inner and outer oppressions. Always emphasizing comedic roots, what Afua wants a Sacred Woman to achieve is to teach Black women that holistic eating and veganism does not necessarily have a white Eurocentric genealogy. Instead, her preface creates an imagined community that supposedly existed during pre-colonial era in which Black Africans were in control of their spiritual, physical, and mental health. Afua asserts that if Black women incorporate the principles of this pre-colonial comedic healing system into their lives, they will be giving birth to a type of future Black African body and community that existed before transatlantic slavery. Afua's revolutionary Black feminism seeks to dismantle the mainstream US ideology that positions European allopathic methods as the only and best choices that Black females have. Intervening with a comedic healing system throws a wrench in the taken-for-granted Eurocentric healing and carnocentric food ideologies of mainstream America that she believes is destroying Black females' ability to achieve womb wellness. Black women in this country have higher rates of fibroid tumors than the mainstream population. And that's one of her focuses with this vegan diet, is to eliminate fibroid tumors through this holistic vegan diet. Just 1 second, I have problems. Okay. So what I find interesting about Queen Afua's text is that she believes that South Egypt is where the best diet lies for African Americans. And this is a South Egypt from before colonialism. So there's this imagined community in her perception of how Black people did or should live. And for her, this is where, for me as a geographer, kind of environment comes into play. And I like a lot of what Afua has to offer, but later in this talk, I'll also talk about a lot of the problems I see with her work. But for her and other Afrocentrists, they believe that Southern Egypt, to look there for an Afrocentric value system is important because there they believe that the women were revered as queens. It was a matriarchal society, and there was this consumption of raw foods diet. Food is medicine. And then they conceive as the space of the North, Europe, as this patriarchal society, the society in which there's a lot of domination of everything, and this is where they see the problems of all the isms like racism and sexism stemming from. So for her, she believes that a lot of the stress-induced racism and sexism that Black women face in this country, a lot of it could be remedied through not eating comfort junk foods that were targeted by, the corporations target low-income communities of color. Burger King and White Castle, they're in these communities, and she looks at these communities as kind of overdosing on these foods for many reasons, but in her book she talks about how a lot of people of African descent deal with the stress of racism by eating these comfort foods. And when you're stressed out, the last thing she believes you need to eat is this food that's laden with animal products and processed food that just kind of exacerbates health problems. And for her, she focuses, you can focus on the whole female body, but she focuses on the womb because of its history of, like I said, of it being the site of intense domination and colonialism and exploitation. And she understands that the womb has been brutalized by colonialism. It's been brutalized in a way where Black women suffer from these womb ailments and these problems. And she understands that the African female's womb is this kind of product. The ailments in it is, the ailments in the womb is a product of, currently it's a product of environmental injustice where there's food deserts and there isn't access to indigenous knowledge that Africans had before enslavement. And she asked, what were the health status and dietary spaces of Black females before European colonialism? Did they suffer from nutritionally induced physical and mental diseases? Did they have an American-type philosophy for success? Did their food choices enable them to live life as healthy as possible? And throughout Sacred Woman, basically the answer is clear that no, that you cannot liberate the Black community through a Eurocentric diet. So this is kind of me going through the book, and I wanted to actually talk about the problems I kind of have with her book. She's helped cure thousands of women, Black women's ailments, such as myself, using the vegan diet. But I do see that there's a problem. And the problems that I see are that sorry about this, my notes, everything is messed up from not having it on camera. Okay. So her vegan decolonial methodology is indeed a methodology of the racially oppressed, but of a specific socioeconomic class and sexual orientation for socioeconomically privileged and heterosexual Black women. So Queen Afua puts her sacred woman in the natural position of creating a new and more pure Black African race through heteronormative gender roles and the heterosexual orientation. Not one time in the book Sacred Woman does Afua offer the possibility that Black African women are partnered with a female. On page 51, she asks women how their wombs feel about the relationships and asks questions including, quote, how many men and what type of men have entered your womb space? What was each experience like, end quote. On page 166, she writes, begin quote, when things don't go smoothly in your relationship, don't blame him. Just clean up from within. There's nothing wrong with him as a man or you as a woman. You are a divine couple by nature, wholesome and loved. What is wrong here is the fried chicken, spare ribs, and candied yams, the meat, the fat, the sugar that of us acting outside of our natural state of divinity. Toxic thoughts and attitudes are created by the poisons on our plate, end quote. Although for her the kitchen is a decolonial space, it is also a space in which she advocates the reproduction of heteronormative gender roles that she feels are natural. On page 92 of her book, she writes that a Black woman's male partner should have alkaline sperm. To achieve this, she suggests, quote, feed your man pure foods as listed above for maximum vibration of your love, end quote. In addition, Afua suggests that men are naturally not fit to bring peace to the world, and it is only through healing the womb by women that peace can be achieved. Men are constructed as being helpless without Black females who should be healing themselves and their Black men in their natural food kitchen. On page 170, Afua wants to combat male aggression and believes that males in the Black women's family are not naturally aggressive. It is the food that they have been consuming that creates this violence. It is commendable that Afua wants to combat sexual violence of particular Black male family members. However, her suggestion implies that it is the colonizer's animal-based food that makes Black males sexually aggressive and not something else. Afua's suggestion, however, is not a new idea, as Carol J. Adams has proposed that meat eating is connected to pornography and other forms of what she personally considers as sexual deviance toward females. Also, Afua's statement about sexual male aggression puts men and women back into the binary of women as naturally non-aggressive and men as naturally aggressive. Veganism is glorified as the ultimate consumption practice, while meat eating is demonized as predatory because it is conflated with male sexual aggression. In her paper, Integrating Ethical Frameworks for Animals, Humans, and Nature, Val Plumwood argues that too many ecofeminists tend to create this aforementioned binary and suggests that it is not human predation itself we need to oppose, as in the ontological view, but what certain social frameworks have made of predation, end quote. Plumwood argues against the stance that vegetarianism and veganism will create more sexually pure behavior, which Adams and Afua do equate with abstinence from animal products. Plumwood continues with, quote, alienated, ascetic forms of vegan strategy also fit snugly into the spaces of neo-Christian and neo-Puritan salvational projects and narratives of original sin, bodily temptation, individual struggle and fall, personal virtue and righteousness, revulsion at the flesh, narratives that have been liberally applied in the Christian past to sexuality, end quote. Plumwood views ecofeminist vegans as prioritizing moral purity over commitment to animal liberation. Afua never labels herself as an ecofeminist and sacred woman, and nor does she even mention animal liberation. However, it is noteworthy that Afua's insistence that females are naturally the mothers of nature, which is similar to the white ecofeminist narrative of Gaia as feminine. And two, Afua's perception of veganism as a cure to particular sexual behaviors of Black males is strikingly similar to that of Carol J. Adams. Despite Adams being grounded in a Eurocentric Christian ethics and Afua being grounded in the Afrocentric ethics of sexuality, their conflation of veganism with moral and sexual purity is noteworthy. However, I do think that Plumwood and Adams are not fully effective at understanding why Queen Afua may want to see veganism as a way to purify the sexual practices and urges of Black females and males. Though Plumwood and Adams have opposing views, they still do not come from the embodied experience of being a black female in the USA. Neither bring in an Afrocentric history or rationale to understanding why veganism may be practiced by groups who are not white racialized subjects. Plumwood even argues that ecofeminist notions of every woman should be vegan is often racist, but doesn't think about what it means that groups like African Holistic Health Movement do think it's natural to eat only a plant-centered diet, and that flesh is impure in a form of internalized racism and colonialism if one were to eat animals. Now, I propose that Afua may be using veganism to respond to the sexual aggression of certain black male family members because of the unique position that racialized colonialism and its aftermath put black men and women in. Within the context of sacred woman, the institution of slavery not only forced black people to be away from their own land, eat a diet that was not theirs, and not be able to practice their African indigenous practices. All of these things also supposedly disrupted healthy sexual practices and philosophies between men and women. It is implied in Sacred Woman that the colonizers' carnocentric and refined foods diet causes black people to have unhealthy relationships with their own sexuality and desires, which is assumed to be heterosexual. For centuries, black people have been seen as hypersexualized within the white imaginary, and in response, many contemporary black females have tried to practice a politics of respectability to abolish the white mainstream notion that they and black men are incapable of being as supposedly sexually pure as white people. So, just for a short history, black men have been naturally criminalized as rapists by white USA, while black women have been naturally constructed as sexually promiscuous. Historically to the present, black men have been punished severely for it, even being hinted that they committed a sexual crime against white women, punished in a way that white males would never be punished for when it was hinted that they committed a sexual crime against a black woman. Suggesting that it is a certain type of food that black men are eating is what is causing them to be sexually aggressive may be Queen Afua's way of fighting against the racist belief that black men are simply that way by nature versus versus nourishment, or the nutrition they're getting or lack thereof. Within the logic of African holistic health, Afua's vegan rationale is a revolutionary black feminist intervention as she attempts to not put her trust in the mainstream white America for changing their perceptions about black male sexuality. Instead, she believes that the only people that can help dispel the myth and or curb the sexually aggressive male behavior in some black families is for the female to take control through the preparation of food in a vegan kitchen space. The problem with Afua's suggestion, however, is that it puts the responsibility of curing sexually aggressive males into the hands of black females, and solely through the avenue of food versus other methods, such as making male sexual aggressors responsible for their own behavior and taking it into their own hands to stop it. The kitchen becomes the place in which black females are expected to cure themselves, their children, and men of toxicity and negativity that Afua believes comes solely from the wrong types of food. Through the lens of feminist geographer Doreen Massey, Afua's perspective can be seen as advocating the proper use of the local space, the kitchen, and proper use of this space that will eventually produce the large scale of a healthier black nation. In her book, Space, Place, and Gender, Doreen Massey argues how certain spaces have been coded as feminine and masculine. The black woman's place must be her new vegan kitchen if she is to make sure that her man is healthy and in his proper place, that being outside of the domestic sphere, working and earning. Afua's rhetoric codes the space of the kitchen as feminine by expecting that black females reconceptualize the space of the kitchen as where they should be to heal their communities. For geographers such as Doreen Massey, she would argue that this is the natural place of black women to restore what has been lost, or she's arguing against that. That's not the natural place. Massey writes that generally it has been problematic that women often stand as the metaphor for nature and for what has been lost or left behind, and that the place called the home is frequently personified by and partakes of the same characteristic as those assigned to woman and mother and love. However, I think it is more complex than this, and depends on who has even been allowed to be called feminine throughout the history of the USA. Doreen Massey applies analysis of geography and gender in Space, Place, and Gender, that's her book, without significantly considering issues of racialization and colonialism on those who have been constructed as feminine. The anti-Black racist stereotypes of Black women in kitchens did not convey them as feminine in the way that white women were seen as feminine while in the kitchen. Early 20th century images of Black females in the kitchen portrayed them as mammies in the white imagination. To be a mammy was to be unfeminine, and that particular way of constructing the unfeminine was seen as fat and desexualized. Hence, it could be that Afua is not using feminine in the same way, or the same oppressive way that most white feminist geographers such as Massey do. Afua could be using feminine to describe Black females in the space of the kitchen because historically, Black females were denied being seen as feminine by white society. So in this sense, using the term feminine becomes empowering because it reminds Black females that the space of the kitchen isn't for a mammy Black female, but is naturally for the sacred and feminine Black female. In Afua's Afrocentric narrative, the kitchen has always been her natural place. But slavery, as well as colonial, capitalist, and imperialist restructuring of the kitchen, turned the space into something unfeminine and dominating. Though Afua falls into the trap of naturalizing certain components of what is true Black femininity, I argue that within the context of a history of Black women being seen as not only unfeminine, but as animals, she wants to assure that Black women can feel naturally feminine and as queens in that kitchen space. However, how she goes about it is not as decolonizing as she may think, which brings in the question, can a Black racialized subject raised in a nation like USA ever fully cure herself from the toxicity of racialized colonialism? In the chapter, Is Decolonization Possible?, Njoki Nathaniwan writes that as a Black female born and raised in Kenya, she knows that colonialism has still marked her consciousness and caused her to look at the world through fragmentation. She suggests that full decolonization may never be possible, and that those who wish to decolonize their minds and bodies from colonialism may still do it by unintentionally replicating the colonizer's value system. This includes even imagining a pre-colonial era that still takes on the value systems that we see today, such as if I'm going to liberate my community, a lot of times people who go through liberation still follow the value systems of white colonialism. So that being, you have to have the proper gender, you have to have the proper class, the proper religion. And how does one kind of decolonize their mind from that? And is it possible, especially for people like Queen Afua who are born and raised in this country? So even though she has the sincere goal of ending the effects of environmental racism on the Black female body, her ignoring women who are not part of the Black heterosexual demographic kind of gets me to ask, is it because she's still in some part colonized by these ways of understanding how gender and sexuality should be performed in America? And my other problem with how she believes that veganism is a way to cure people of African descent is that, well, I don't know, most Black people or Black identified people in this country are mixed. So the way she talks about race, it's as if it's biological, and at least my understanding of race is that race is a social construct. So how does it work when you have, say, a woman of African descent who's also mixed, because we're all mixed, and she has she's Chinese and she's African and Native American. What vegan healing system would Queen Afua recommend, or by default, does anyone who have any trace of African descent and have to follow this particular diet? So when I read her book, I often get confused about why is it that she's so focused on Black race almost as a biological category versus understanding it as a social construct, and that to be a Black racialized subject, it's changed through time. And depending where you go in the world, if you look black in America, you may be seen or read somewhere else, something else. So I'm wondering how she kind of encompasses her vegan healing with understanding blackness or just racialization more as a social category and less of a biological factor. And basically, what I wanted to wrap it up, and thank you again for helping me with my technological issues. I want to wrap it up and just propose that she comes through veganism in a way that most of the mainstream vegan America does not really see or get. So for her, for most of mainstream America who practices veganism, it's an ethical thing. It's not ethical to eat animals. So for mainstream vegan America, that's how their ethical veganism works. For her, veganism is an ethical issue even though she doesn't talk about animal rights, because for her it was unethical for people of African descent to be taken away from their natural environment and then have this Eurocentric diet forced upon them. So to kind of reclaim this raw foods, Southern Kemetic Egyptian diet is an ethical issue. It's ethical. So this is how her veganism is ethical. But at the same time, she's leaving out, many other people who don't kind of fit that model of what a true black person should or should not be. And this is kind of where I come in with my work with the Sistah Vegan project, which is more about collaboration and solidarity. And looking at veganism first, most of us women, we've been influenced by Queen Afua, but many of us don't fit the model of blackness that is seen in African holistic communities. So for me, myself, I'm partnered not with a man of African descent, but I'm partnered with a white man. And there are sister vegans in our project who are partnered with women who identify as trans, who don't necessarily fit into Queen Afua's model of blackness. So with the Sistah Vegan project, it's all about kind of solidarity and really understanding that we cannot just be exclusive and not think about how, if we are to create communities of wellness for women who identify as black, that we cannot forget about all the other sentient beings that do suffer and are oppressed because of particular legacies of colonialism. So that's kind of where the Sistah Vegan project kind of goes off to what I think is a more inclusive way of understanding justice, and in a way that Angelia Davis kind of brings up, where we in the Sistah Vegan project, we talk about the commodities that we want to eat and the commodities that we want to put in our body that are vegan, but we also want to understand multiple levels how us as black women, we were seen as commodities 200 years ago. How has that affected our health? At the same time, we're eating things that have been commodified. Where does my chocolate maybe vegan? How has that constructed or created environments of suffering, in developing countries? Or I'm going to buy this particular product. What's it called? Acai berries. They're really popular now. But so who's harvesting it? What human beings are being exploited for that? So that's kind of where the Sistah Vegan project takes in consideration just the concept of commodification, capitalism, racism that Queen Afua talks about and Angelia Davis talks about, and kind of merges them to understand, I guess, a more complex and more inclusive type of environmental justice. So that's kind of what I want to share with you today. And trust me, in a year when my dissertation is actually complete, it will hopefully be more coherent. But this was just me kind of working through the last part of my dissertation chapter and kind of sharing with the audience. And I welcome questions, because that's how I make it stronger. Like if something wasn't clear, let me know. It was only a third of